I never thought I'd be grateful for my mother's obsession with prenups. But here we are, I muttered, staring at the pristine white walls of our new home. The house was a wedding gift from my parents, Patricia and George, nestled in the picturesque landscape of Upper New York. It was supposed to be the start of our happily ever after, but life had other plans. My husband Bart was busy unpacking boxes in the living room, his tall frame bent over as he sorted through our belongings. "Natalie, honey, can you give me a hand with this?" he called out, his voice muffled by the cardboard. I sighed, pushing away from the window. "Coming," I replied, plastering on a smile as I joined him. As I helped Bart unpack, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd been unusually quiet since we arrived, his usual charm and easygoing nature replaced by a nervous energy. "Everything okay?" I asked, placing a hand on his arm. Bart hesitated, then set down the box he was holding. "Actually, there's something we need to talk about," he said, his blue eyes clouded with worry. My stomach dropped. "What is it?" Before Bart could answer, the doorbell rang. He visibly relaxed, as if saved by the bell. "That must be Mom," he said, hurrying to the door. I froze. His mother, Jennifer, wasn't supposed to visit until next week. I followed Bart to the entryway, where he was already embracing a petite woman with graying hair. "Jennifer," I said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise." Jennifer pulled away from Bart and turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh, Natalie," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry to barge in like this, but I couldn't wait any longer." Bart placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, why don't we sit down?" he suggested, leading her to the living room. As we settled onto the couch, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I felt a growing sense of dread. Jennifer clutched Bart's hand, her knuckles white. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. Jennifer took a deep breath. "I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer," she said, her words hanging heavy in the air. "The doctors say I have less than a year." I gasped, genuinely shocked. "Oh, Jennifer, I'm so sorry," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. She gave me a watery smile. "Thank you, dear, but that's not all." She glanced at Bart, who nodded encouragingly. "I can't live alone anymore, and I was hoping, well, we were hoping." Bart cleared his throat. "Mom's going to move in with us, Natalie," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Our new home, our fresh start, was suddenly being invaded. But how could I object? The woman was dying, for heaven's sake. "Of course," I heard myself say, as if from a distance. "We have plenty of room." Jennifer's face lit up. "Oh, thank you both so much," she gushed, pulling us into a group hug. As we embraced, I caught Bart's eye over his mother's shoulder. He mouthed a silent "thank you," but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. This wasn't how our life together was supposed to begin. Later that night, as Bart slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How had our perfect new beginning turned into this? I loved Bart, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of my own life. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test the limits of my love, patience, and ultimately my capacity for revenge. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as I tried to focus on my laptop screen. 3 weeks had passed since Jennifer moved in, and I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every morning, I'd find her rearranging my carefully organized cupboards or changing our routines without consultation. "Natalie, dear," Jennifer's voice chirped from behind me. "I hope you don't mind, but I've invited the ladies from my support group over for tea this afternoon." I gripped my coffee mug tighter, forcing a smile. "Actually, Jennifer, I have an important conference call scheduled for—" "Oh, don't worry," she interrupted, patting my shoulder. "We'll be quiet as church mice. You won't even know we're here." Before I could protest further, Bart wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas despite it being nearly noon. "Morning, ladies," he yawned, kissing his mother's cheek before giving me a quick peck. "Bart," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "can I talk to you for a minute, in private?" He followed me to our bedroom, looking confused. "What's up, honey?" I took a deep breath. "Bart, we need to set some boundaries with your mother. She's taking over the house, changing things without asking, and now she's inviting people over during my work hours." Bart's face fell. "Come on, Nat. She's going through a tough time. Can't you cut her some slack?" "I've been cutting her slack for weeks," I snapped. "But this is our home, and I need some say in what goes on here. It's her home now, too, Bart replied, his voice hardening. And in case you've forgotten, she's dying. The least we can do is make her comfortable. I felt a surge of anger. And what about my comfort? My work? Does that not matter anymore? Bart's eyes narrowed. I can't believe how selfish you're being right now. My mother needs us, and all you can think about is yourself. His words hit me like a slap. Selfish? I've bent over backward to accommodate her, but there has to be a limit. Well, maybe you need to be more flexible, Bart shot back. Family comes first, Natalie. I thought you understood that. I stared at him, feeling a chasm opening between us. I thought we were a family, Bart, you and me. He shook his head, looking disappointed. We are, but that includes my mother now, too. I need you to accept that. Without another word, he turned and left the room. I stood there, stunned by the realization that for the first time in our marriage, Bart had chosen someone else over me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. True to her word, Jennifer's friends were quiet, but their presence felt like an invasion. I struggled to concentrate on my call, acutely aware of the murmured conversations and occasional laughter drifting up from downstairs. That evening, as I was clearing up the kitchen, I overheard Bart and Jennifer talking in the living room. I'm worried about Natalie, Jennifer said softly. She seems so tense all the time. Maybe this arrangement isn't working out. No, Mom, Bart replied firmly. This is your home now. Natalie will adjust. She just needs time. I set down the plate I was holding, my hands shaking. Adjust? Was that all I was expected to do? Silently accept the complete upheaval of my life? As I stood there, grappling with a mix of hurt and anger, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated. This wasn't the strong, independent Natalie I knew myself to be. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I might lose myself entirely. But how could I fight back without seeming like the villain in this family drama? Little did I know, the situation was about to become even more complicated, pushing me closer to the breaking point and setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. I was in the middle of a crucial work presentation when my phone buzzed incessantly. Ignoring it, I powered through, only to find 5 missed calls from Bart when I finished. My heart raced as I dialed him back, fearing the worst about Jennifer's health. Nat, great news! Bart's voice boomed through the speaker. Cole's coming home. I blinked, confused. Cole? Your brother? What do you mean, coming home? He's quitting his job in California and moving back east, Bart explained, his excitement palpable. He'll stay with us while he gets back on his feet. Isn't it fantastic? The room spun. Another person in our already crowded house? Bart, wait a minute. We can't just... Oh, Mom's calling. Gotta go, love you. He hung up before I could protest. I sat there, stunned. How could Bart make such a monumental decision without even consulting me? Our home wasn't a halfway house for his entire family. That evening, I confronted Bart in the kitchen while Jennifer watched her favorite game show in the living room. We need to talk about Cole, I said, keeping my voice low. Bart looked up from chopping vegetables. What about him? Isn't it great he's coming back? I took a deep breath. Bart, you can't just invite people to live in our home without discussing it with me first. He set down the knife, frowning. Cole's family, Natalie. He needs our support. And what about what I need? I countered. This is my home, too, and I feel like I'm losing all control over it. Bart's expression hardened. You're being selfish again. Cole's going through a tough time, and Mom needs all the family support she can get. Don't you dare call me selfish, I hissed. I've bent over backward to accommodate your mother, but this is too much. We're supposed to be partners, Bart. You can't keep making these decisions unilaterally. I'm not, he insisted. I'm doing what's best for our family. Our family? I laughed bitterly. It seems like your definition of our family doesn't include me anymore. Jennifer's voice floated in from the living room. Is everything all right in there, dears? Bart called back. Everything's fine, Mom, before turning to me with a pleading look. Can we talk about this later? I don't want to upset her. I threw up my hands in frustration and stormed out of the kitchen. As I passed the living room, Jennifer caught my eye, her expression a mix of concern and something else. Was that triumph? The next few days were a flurry of activity as Bart prepared for Cole's arrival. I I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the growing resentment in my chest. The night before Cole was due to arrive, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Nat?" Bart's voice was soft in the darkness. "Are you still upset about Cole?" I turned to face him. "It's not just about Cole, Bart. It's about us. I feel like I'm losing you to your family." He reached out, pulling me close. "You're not losing me. You're my wife, and I love you. But my family needs me right now. Can't you understand that?" I wanted to understand. I really did. But as I lay there in Bart's arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was slipping away, one family crisis at a time. The next morning, I steeled myself as I heard a car pull up outside. Moments later, the front door burst open, and Cole's booming voice filled the house. "Honey, I'm home," he called out, laughing at his own joke. I plastered on a smile and went to greet him, but stopped short in the hallway. Cole wasn't alone. Behind him stood a young woman, her arm linked with his. "Hey, sis," Cole grinned, oblivious to my shock. "Meet Amber, my fiancée. Hope you don't mind, but she'll be staying with us too. We're getting married." As Bart and Jennifer rushed to congratulate the happy couple, I stood frozen, feeling like an outsider in my own home. This wasn't just an invasion anymore. It was a full-scale takeover. And I was the only one who seemed to care. The once pristine kitchen counters were now cluttered with empty beer bottles and half-eaten bags of chips. I grimaced as I navigated the mess, the acrid smell of stale cigarette smoke assaulting my nostrils. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a frat house. "Cole," I called out, my patience wearing thin. "How many times do I have to ask you to clean up after yourself?" A muffled groan came from the living room. I stormed in to find Cole sprawled on the couch, Amber curled up beside him. The coffee table was littered with more bottles and an overflowing ashtray. "Sorry, sis," Cole mumbled, not bothering to open his eyes. "We'll get to it later." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. "No, you'll get to it now. I have clients coming over in an hour, and this place is a pigsty." Amber stirred, fixing me with a bleary-eyed glare. "Chill out, Natalie. It's not like it's a big deal." Before I could respond, Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. "What's all the commotion about?" I turned to her, exasperated. "Jennifer, look at this mess. It's unacceptable." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, they're young. Let them have their fun. I'll tidy up later." "That's not the point," I snapped. "This is my home, and I expect it to be respected." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Our home, dear. Remember, we're all family here." The word family felt like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to argue further, but the smell of smoke suddenly intensified. Whirling around, I saw flames licking up the curtains near where Cole had carelessly tossed a cigarette butt. "Fire!" I screamed, rushing to grab the fire extinguisher. Chaos erupted as everyone scrambled to action. I managed to douse the flames, but not before they left a large charred hole in the expensive curtains my mother had gifted us. As the smoke cleared, I stood there, shaking with anger and shock. Bart burst into the room, having heard the commotion from upstairs. "What happened?" he demanded, looking around wildly. "Your brother?" I spat. "Almost burned down our house because he can't be bothered to use an ashtray." Cole had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Save it," I cut him off. "I want you and Amber out, now." Bart stepped between us. "Natalie, calm down, it was an accident." I couldn't believe my ears. Calm down? "Bart, do you not see how serious this is?" "Of course I do," he said, his voice maddeningly calm. "But kicking them out isn't the answer. We're family, we need to stick together." I looked around at their faces, Bart's pleading, Jennifer's disapproving, Cole's sheepish, Amber's defiant. In that moment, I felt more alone than ever. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "If that's how you all feel, I'll be the one to leave." I stormed upstairs, throwing some clothes into a bag. As I zipped it up, Bart appeared in the doorway. "Nat, don't do this," he begged. "Where will you go?" I shouldered past him. "Anywhere but here." As I reached the front door, Jennifer called out, "Natalie, dear, you're overreacting. Why don't we all sit down and talk about this?" I turned to face them one last time. "There's nothing to talk about. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, Bart. And it's not with me or our marriage." With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I got into my car, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, I realized I had no idea where I was going. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. As I drove away, tears blurring my vision, I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The life I thought I had, the marriage I believed in, it was all crumbling around me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I'd been avoiding for weeks. Maybe this marriage wasn't worth saving after all. I returned home after 3 days at a hotel, my anger simmering, but my resolve strengthened. As I walked through the front door, the eerie silence struck me. No TV blaring, no chatter, no mess in sight. Something was off. Bart emerged from the kitchen, his face a mask of forced calm. "Natalie, we need to talk." I steeled myself. "Yes, we do. This situation is untenable, Bart. Things need to change." He nodded, gesturing to the living room. As we sat down, I noticed Jennifer peering from behind a partially closed door. My jaw clenched. "I've been thinking," Bart began, his voice unnaturally steady. "Maybe it's best if we take some time apart." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "It's just the constant arguing, the tension. It's not good for anyone, especially Mom in her condition." I felt like I was drowning. "So you want to separate because I'm making your mother uncomfortable?" "It's not just that," he hurried to add. "Your attitude, the constant nagging, it's creating a toxic environment for everyone." I laughed bitterly. "My attitude? Bart, have you looked around lately? Your family has taken over our home, our life." "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about," he sighed. "You keep saying your family like they're not your family, too." "Because they're not acting like it," I exploded. "They've shown zero respect for me or this home, and you've done nothing but enable them." Bart's face hardened. "They're going through a difficult time. I thought you'd be more understanding." "Understanding?" I was on my feet now, shaking with fury. "I've been nothing but understanding. I've put up with your mother rearranging my home, your brother nearly burning it down, and you've consistently chosen them over me, your wife." "That's not fair," Bart protested weakly. "No, what's not fair is you blindsiding me with this separation nonsense instead of standing up for our marriage." The door creaked open, and Jennifer stepped out, her face a picture of concern. "I'm so sorry, dears. I never meant to cause such strife." I rounded on her. "Oh, save it, Jennifer. This is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? To drive a wedge between us?" Bart jumped to his feet. "That's enough. How dare you accuse my mother?" "Your mother, your brother, your family," I spat. "That's all I've heard for months. What about me, Bart? What about us?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "I don't know what you want from me, Natalie. I'm trying to keep everyone happy." "Except me," I finished for him. "Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in making everyone happy but your wife." Jennifer stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. "Natalie, dear, perhaps if you tried to be a little more accommodating." I jerked away from her. "Don't touch me, and don't you dare tell me how to behave in my own home." Bart's eyes flashed with anger. "That's it. I can't take this anymore. Natalie, I think you should leave. Take some time to cool off and think about your priorities." I stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring inside me. "My priorities? What about yours, Bart? When did I stop being your priority?" He didn't answer, just looked away. In that moment, I saw our marriage for what it truly was, a sham, a convenience for Bart to play the dutiful son and brother while I faded into the background. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "I'll leave. But don't expect me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. This time, you've gone too far." As I stormed upstairs to pack a bag, I heard Jennifer consoling Bart, telling him he'd done the right thing. Their voices faded as I moved through our bedroom, grabbing essentials. My hand paused over a framed photo of Bart and me on our wedding day. With a sudden, decisive movement, I slammed it face down. That happy couple was gone, replaced by strangers occupying the same space. As I left, bag in hand, I realized this wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. I sat in my best friend Sarah's living room, clutching a glass of wine like a lifeline. My voice cracked as I recounted the events of the past few months, ending with Bart's devastating suggestion of separation. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "That spineless weasel! How dare he choose his family over you?" I sighed, feeling drained. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. I feel like I've lost everything." She leaned forward, her expression determined. "No, Natalie, you haven't lost everything. You've lost dead weight. It's time to take back control of your life." Her words sparked something inside me. But how? Bart and his family have taken over my home, my life. Sarah's lips curved into a sly smile. Remember who owns that house, Nat? Your parents gave it to you, not Bart. My eyes widened as realization dawned. You're right, the deed is in my name. Exactly, Sarah nodded. It's time to talk to your parents and a lawyer. You need to protect yourself and your assets. The next day, I met with my parents, Patricia and George. Their faces were a mix of concern and anger as I explained the situation. Oh, sweetheart, Mom said, pulling me into a hug. We had no idea things had gotten so bad. Dad's voice was steel. That boy never deserved you, Natalie, or our generosity. I took a deep breath. I need your help. I want to fight back, but I'm not sure how. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. We have just the person, Dad said, reaching for his phone. Remember your cousin Michael? He's a divorce attorney now. Within hours, I was sitting in Michael's office, laying out my story. He listened intently, his brow furrowing as I spoke. Natalie, he said when I finished, based on what you've told me, you have a strong case. The house is clearly your separate property, not a marital asset. Bart has no claim to it. Hope bloomed in my chest. So what do we do? Michael's smile was predatory. We go on the offensive. I'll draw up divorce papers immediately. We'll make it clear that Bart and his family need to vacate your property. As I left Michael's office, a plan forming in my mind, my phone buzzed. It was Bart. Natalie, please come home, his voice was pleading. We need to talk. I steeled myself. I'll be there in an hour. Walking into our house, my house, I felt a surge of confidence. Bart was waiting in the living room, looking haggard. Nat, I'm so sorry, he began. I've been thinking, and I realize I made a mistake. Can we please work this out? I almost laughed. Work what out, Bart? The fact that you chose your family over me? That you let them disrespect me in my own home? He flinched. I know I messed up, but no. I cut him off. There are no buts. It's too late for apologies. Bart's face fell. What are you saying? I took a deep breath, channeling all my hurt and anger into my next words. I'm saying it's over, Bart. I want a divorce. The color drained from his face. Divorce? Natalie? Please, let's not be hasty. Hasty, I scoffed. I've been patient for months, while you and your family walked all over me. Well, not anymore. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of concern. What's going on? I turned to her, my voice ice. What's going on is that you, Cole, and Amber need to start packing. This is my house, and I want you all out. Bart stood up, his face twisted with anger. You can't do that. This is our home. I pulled out the papers Michael had given me. Actually, I can. This house was a gift from my parents to me. It's not marital property, Bart. You have no claim to it. As the reality of the situation sank in, I saw the shock and disbelief on their faces. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of power and control. You have 1 week to move out, I said, my voice steady. All of you. As I turned to leave, Bart grabbed my arm. Natalie, please. Don't do this. I love you. I jerked away from him, tears stinging my eyes. If you loved me, Bart, we wouldn't be here. Goodbye. Walking out of the house, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, but most of all, a sense of liberation. The war wasn't over, but I had just won a major battle, and I was ready to fight for my life back, no matter what it took. The week following my ultimatum passed in a blur of legal meetings and tense silence at home. Bart and his family seemed to be in a state of shock, tiptoeing around me as if I might explode at any moment. Part of me relished their discomfort, but another part ached for the life I thought we'd have. On the day of our first negotiation meeting, I steeled myself in the parking lot of Michael's office. This was it, the moment that would define my future. As I walked in, I saw Bart sitting there with his own lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Natalie, he said, his voice cracking, please, can we talk about this privately? I shook my head. We're beyond that, Bart. Let's just get this over with. Michael cleared his throat. All right, let's begin. Mr. Harrison, we've prepared a comprehensive divorce settlement. The main point of contention is, of course, the house. Bart's lawyer leaned forward. Yes, about that. My client contends that as the house was a wedding gift, it should be considered marital property. I felt a surge of anger, but Michael just smiled. I'm afraid that's not the case. We have documentation proving the house was gifted solely to Mrs. Harrison by her parents. It's her separate property. The color drained from Bart's face. What? But that's our home. We've lived there for years. Be that as it may, Michael continued, legally the house belongs to Natalie. She's within her rights to ask you and your family to vacate the premises. Bart turned to me, his eyes pleading. Natalie, you can't do this. Where will we go? What about my mother? I felt a lump in my throat but pushed through. I'm sorry, Bart, but you should have thought about that before you let your family take over our lives. His lawyer whispered something to him, and Bart's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play it, we'll fight this in court. I'm sure a judge will see reason. Michael shook his head. I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Harrison. The law is clear on this matter. You'd be wasting time and money you don't have. The meeting devolved into heated arguments and tense negotiations. Hours passed, and I felt my energy draining. Just when I thought we'd reached an impasse, Bart suddenly deflated. Enough, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll sign the papers. We'll move out. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. This was really happening. My marriage was over. As we prepared to leave, Bart caught my arm. Natalie, I know I messed up, but is this really what you want? To throw away everything we had? I looked into his eyes, seeing the man I once loved. We threw it away a long time ago, Bart. This is just making it official. Leaving the office, I felt a mix of triumph and loss. I had won, but at what cost? That evening, as I sat alone in my quiet house, the reality of my situation hit me. I was free, but I was also alone. The house that was once filled with laughter and love now felt empty and cold. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. How did it go? Want me to come over? I stared at the message, tears welling up in my eyes. This was my new reality. No more Bart, no more in-laws, no more chaos. Just me, in this big, empty house. As I typed my reply, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. One that I would write on my own terms. Come over, I texted back. It's time to celebrate my independence. I took a deep breath, looking around at the house that was now truly mine. The battle was won, but the war of rebuilding my life was just beginning. And for the first time in months, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The day Bart and his family were set to move out dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside me. I stood at the window, watching as a moving truck pulled up to the curb. Bart emerged from the house, carrying a box. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of regret in his gaze before he quickly looked away. Jennifer followed, leaning heavily on Cole's arm. She glanced up at my window, her expression unreadable. As I watched them load the truck, memories flooded back. The day we moved in, our housewarming party, the countless dinners and lazy Sundays we'd shared. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I making a mistake? The doorbell rang, jolting me from my reverie. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, a bottle of champagne in one hand and a determined look on her face. I figured you could use some moral support, she said, stepping inside. I smiled gratefully. You have no idea. We sat in the kitchen, watching the proceedings through the window. Sarah poured us each a glass of champagne. To new beginnings, she toasted. As we clinked glasses, Bart appeared in the doorway. Natalie, can we talk? Just for a minute? Sarah squeezed my hand and discreetly left the room. I steeled myself, facing Bart. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He ran a hand through his hair, looking lost. I wanted to say I'm sorry, for everything. I never meant for things to end up like this. I felt a lump in my throat. Neither did I, Bart. But we can't go back. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I know. I just hope, someday, you can forgive me. As he turned to leave, I called out, Bart? He paused, looking back. I hope you find happiness, I said softly. A sad smile crossed his face. You too, Nat. You deserve it. And then he was gone. I watched from the window as the moving truck pulled away, taking with it the remnants of my old life. Sarah reappeared, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. How are you feeling? I took a deep breath. Honestly, I'm not sure. Relieved, sad, scared, all of the above. She nodded understandingly. That's normal. But you know what? You're free now. This is your chance to rediscover yourself. As her words sank in, I felt a spark of excitement ignite within me. She was right. For the first time in years, I was truly free to live life on my own terms. We spent the rest of the day reimagining the house. We moved furniture, discussed paint colors, and planned a complete overhaul of the guest room, Jennifer's old room, into a home office. As evening fell, we sat on the patio, enjoying the peaceful silence. Sarah's phone buzzed, and she grinned as she read the message. "So," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "remember my colleague, David? The one I told you about?" I nodded, curious. "Well, he's been asking about you. Wanted to know if you might be interested in grabbing coffee sometime." I felt a flutter of nervousness and excitement. "I don't know, Sarah. Isn't it too soon?" She shook her head. "It's just coffee, Nat. No pressure, but it might be nice to remember that there are good men out there, men who will put you first." I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? Tell him I'd love to." As Sarah tapped out a reply, I gazed out at the garden, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. This house, once a symbol of my failed marriage, now represented a new beginning. It was mine, truly mine, to fill with new memories, new friendships, and perhaps someday new love. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the end of one chapter and the exciting beginning of another. Whatever the future held, I was ready to face it head-on, stronger and wiser than before. As the sun set on this tumultuous day, I realized that sometimes the end of one dream is simply the beginning of a better one, and I couldn't wait to see what this new dream had in store for me. "Guess what? We had a baby! Come celebrate with us!" Vanessa's voice dripped with insincerity as it came through the phone, jolting me out of the quiet comfort of my living room. My fingers tightened around the phone. The audacity of this woman never ceased to amaze me. "Vanessa," I said slowly, forcing a calmness into my voice that I did not feel. "Congratulations." "Thanks, Emily. It's going to be this Saturday. You have to come. It wouldn't be the same without you." Her cheerful tone grated against my nerves, but I wasn't about to let her see that. "I'll check our calendar," I replied, non-committal. The last thing I wanted was to celebrate anything with Vanessa, but I knew avoiding her completely was impossible. "Perfect. See you there." She hung up before I could respond. I let out a deep sigh and dropped the phone onto the couch. Derek, who must have noticed the tension on my face, walked over from the kitchen. "What's wrong?" he asked, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's Vanessa," I said, unable to prevent the bitterness creeping into my voice. "She wants us to come to a celebration for their new baby." Derek's expression darkened. "She's something else, isn't she? She stole my fiancé without a second thought, and now she wants me to celebrate with her?" I said, more to myself than to Derek. The past I had tried so hard to move on from reared its ugly head yet again. "We don't have to go if you don't want to," Derek suggested, wrapping his arms around me. I leaned into his embrace, closing my eyes and trying to let the warmth of his touch soothe me. "No," I said after a moment. "We'll go. I need to show her that I've moved on, that she didn't break me." Derek kissed the top of my head. "I'll be right there with you." Saturday arrived quicker than I would have liked. As we drove to Vanessa and Brian's home, memories of my past relationship with Brian flooded my mind. I pushed them aside, focusing on the present. Derek's presence beside me was an anchor. We reached the house, a picture-perfect suburban home. Vanessa had always wanted the most desirable things. Her attention to superficial details never changed. As we walked up to the front door, Vanessa was there to greet us. "Emily, Derek, I am so glad you could make it." She hugged me stiffly, an overly sweet smile plastered on her face. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, my own smile not quite reaching my eyes. Brian was inside, holding the baby, a proud smile on his face. Seeing him after all this time brought back a flood of emotions, but I held my head high and walked over to him. "Congratulations, Brian." "Thanks, Emily. It means a lot that you're here," he said, his smile genuine. I could see a flicker of the man I used to love in his eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by the reality of our past. Derek stayed close by, his presence a constant reassurance. Vanessa fluttered around, playing the perfect hostess, but I could sense the tension beneath her polished exterior. Near the end of the party, Vanessa cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting a drink. "So how's married life treating you?" she asked. "Better than I could have ever imagined," I replied honestly, a genuine smile on my face this time. She studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You've really moved on, haven't you?" Yes, Vanessa, I said, meeting her gaze directly. I have. A shadow crossed her face, but she quickly replaced it with another fake smile. That's good to hear. Derek appeared in the doorway then, holding my coat. You ready to go, Emily? Yes, I am, I said, walking over to him and slipping my arm through his. I looked back at Vanessa one last time. Goodbye, Vanessa. As we walked out of the house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had faced the ghosts of my past, and I was stronger for it. Derek squeezed my hand, a silent promise that we would face whatever came next together. Back home, the drive still lingering in my mind, Derek sat beside me, warm and silent. I knew what I had to do. The past few days had stirred something inside me, a need to confront the memories I'd buried. I was sitting at the dining table when it hit me, Brian's blue eyes, his light laughter, and how it all began. Just a small volunteer event downtown. Emily, he had said, extending a hand as we stood by the food stand. I'm Brian. Nice to finally meet you in person. His smile was genuine, and his eyes lit up when he saw me. We had exchanged emails for months, brainstorming ways to support local shelters. In person, he was even more charming. We clicked instantly, sharing an easy camaraderie. As the months went by, our meetings turned into dates. One cool autumn evening, Brian and I stood on a rickety bridge overlooking a small, serene creek. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his coat pocket. My heart raced. As he opened the box, the glint of the diamond ring caught the moonlight. Emily, will you marry me? His voice was soft, hopeful, as if the world hung on my answer. I had said yes. It had felt right, destined even. Until Vanessa. Vanessa had shown up at our engagement party, uninvited but with that signature smile. Ems, long time no see, she had said, pulling me into a hug. Despite her cheerful demeanor, an unsettling chill always accompanied Vanessa. Derek wandered into the room, breaking my reverie. Penny for your thoughts? He asked, sitting across from me. Just remembering how it all started, I replied. I'd like to hear it, if you're willing to share, he said gently. All right, I said, drawing a deep breath. Vanessa had been the friend everyone warned you about, always looking for ways to undermine, subtly belittle. She had a knack for finding weaknesses and exploiting them. It was no wonder she had wormed her way into Brian's life. One afternoon, I had suggested a double date, introduce Vanessa to Brian, try to mend old fences. But as weeks passed, Brian seemed increasingly distant. You're working late again? I'd asked him one night, a hint of frustration in my voice. Yeah, just a lot going on at the office, he replied, not meeting my eyes. The strain between us grew, but I wanted to believe in him, in us, until one evening, by sheer chance, I stumbled upon them. They were at the local park, hidden away but not invisible. Brian was in Vanessa's embrace, her lips pressed close to his ear. You're so much more exciting than Emily. His voice was low, but the words seared into me. Vanessa's laughter followed. I knew you'd realize how boring she is. I felt the ground fall beneath me, I said to Derek now, my voice trembling. Derek reached over, taking my hand in his. And yet here you are, stronger than ever. I nodded. It wasn't easy, but it made me who I am now. I believe in you, Emily. We'll face whatever comes next together. His resolve steadied me. With Derek by my side, I felt a new surge of strength. I would see this through, and Vanessa would see just how strong I had become. The next day, as I sorted through my old photos, I found one of Brian and me at a small cafe. It was from the day I introduced him to Vanessa. The three of us, laughing and oblivious to the chaos that lay ahead. I remember that day vividly. It was the first time the two of them met. We were at the Red Maple Cafe, a quaint place downtown known for its coffee and pastries. Brian, this is Vanessa, I said cheerfully, motioning to her as she walked in. Vanessa flashed her charming smile, and I felt a pang of unease. Nice to meet you, Vanessa, Brian said, shaking her hand. Likewise, Brian. Emily talks about you all the time, Vanessa replied smoothly. We settled at a corner table. Brian and Vanessa started chatting about everything, movies, travel, work. Vanessa had a way of making people open up, making them feel like they were the only person in the room. I tried to join in, but it became clear I was more an observer than a participant. Weeks passed, and Brian began to grow distant. He blamed it on work stress. I didn't want to believe anything else. One night, as he left for another supposed late-night meeting, I decided to follow him. Under the dim streetlights, I trailed his car until he stopped at a park. He got out, and there she was, Vanessa, waiting for him. I watched from a distance, hiding in the shadows. They talked, but soon their conversation turned into an embrace and then a kiss. "You're so much more exciting than Emily," Brian said, running his fingers through her hair. Vanessa laughed softly. "I knew you'd realize how boring she is." My heart shattered. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in my gut. I stumbled back, trying to leave quietly, but stepped on a branch. "What was that?" Brian snapped, looking around. I ducked behind a tree, holding my breath. After a moment, they seemed to shrug it off, and I took the chance to escape. My world crashed down around me that night. I went to our apartment and waited, tears streaming down my face. When Brian came home, I confronted him. "So, late night at work, huh?" I said bitterly. He looked startled. "Emily, it's not what you think." "Save it, Brian." I cut him off, my voice shaking. "I saw you with her. How long has this been going on?" He ran a hand through his hair, eyes avoiding mine. I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't mean for this to happen." "How could you do this to me? To us?" Anger mixed with heartbreak in my voice. "It just happened," he said weakly. "I felt something with Vanessa that I didn't feel with me." I interrupted. "Spare me, Brian. You're pathetic." He looked like he wanted to say more, but I couldn't take it. I grabbed my purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. I called Vanessa the next day. "We need to talk," I said coldly. "Sure, Emily. Should I bring coffee?" Her tone was mocking. I met her at the cafe. The confrontation was swift and brutal. "Why, Vanessa?" She shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "Because I could, Emily, and because you trust too easily." "You're vile," I said, my voice low. "Maybe, but I'm good at it," she replied with satisfaction. That was the last day I spoke to either of them. Until now. As I placed the photo back into the box, Derek came into the room. "You all right?" he asked, concern in his eyes. "Yeah," I said, taking his hand. "I'm ready to face what's next." "Remember, I'm with you every step of the way," he reassured me. With his support, I knew I could confront the darkest parts of my past and come out stronger on the other side. I woke up the next morning feeling drained, yet resolute. The confrontation last night had dredged up old wounds, but it also gave me a newfound determination. It was time to rebuild. The first step was to get out of the house. I threw on a comfortable pair of jeans and a sweater, and Derek suggested we go for a walk to clear our minds. We strolled down the bustling streets, eventually finding ourselves at a small, cozy cafe. "I could use a coffee," Derek said, smiling at me. "Sounds good," I replied. As we sat at a corner table, I glanced around and noticed a familiar face. Derek must have seen my expression change. "What's up?" he asked. "It's Brian," I said quietly, motioning with my eyes. He was sitting alone, staring into a cup of coffee. The sight of him brought back a flood of emotions, but I kept my composure. "Do you want to leave?" Derek asked, ready to whisk me away at a moment's notice. "No," I said firmly. "I need to face this." I walked over to Brian, each step deliberate and steady. He looked up, eyes widening in surprise. "Emily." "Brian," I said, taking a seat across from him. I'm sorry," he stammered, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not here for apologies," I said simply. "I just want to understand why." Brian looked down, fiddling with the handle of his cup. "I don't have a good excuse, Emily. I was selfish. Vanessa was different, new. I know it's no justification." "No, it's not," I replied bluntly. "You knew what we had meant to me, and yet you chose to throw it all away." He nodded, a look of regret etched on his face. "I know, and I've regretted it every day since." "Does Vanessa know you feel this way?" I asked, curious about the dynamics of their relationship now. He hesitated, then sighed. "Vanessa doesn't care about how I feel. She never has. It's always been about her." I studied him for a moment. The man sitting before me was a shadow of the person I once loved. "And yet you stayed with her." "Leaving her now would ruin everything," he said quietly. "My career, my reputation. She knows too much." I could see the fear in his eyes. Vanessa had a grip on him tighter than I'd imagined. "Brian," I said softly, "you deserve better than to live in fear." He shook his head, clearly defeated. "I don't know if I can ever get out." I stood up, determined to face my future without looking back. "That's your choice to make, Brian, but I won't be a part of it." I walked back to Derek, who had watched the whole exchange from a distance. "How did it go?" he asked, eyes filled with concern. "I think it's time to stop dwelling on the past," I said with a newfound clarity. Derek nodded. "Sounds like a good plan." Days passed, and I focused on my work and building a life with Derek. It was during a business seminar that my new chapter truly began. I met Derek again, though this time as partners running our own startup. He was speaking about innovation when our eyes met across the room. Building something new requires vision and partnership, he concluded, stepping down from the podium. I approached him, confidence restored. Great speech, Derek, I said, a genuine smile lighting up my face. Thanks, Emily. We make a good team, don't we? He replied, returning my smile. We do. Here's to new beginnings, I said, holding up my coffee cup. To new beginnings, he echoed, clinking his cup against mine. As we walked out together, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, Derek and I would face them hand in hand. The past had shaped me, but it wouldn't define me. I was ready for whatever came next. The call from Vanessa lingered in my mind, but I knew attending their gathering was the first step in facing my demons. Derek was supportive. Together, we'll show her you can't be broken, he said one evening as we planned our approach. I won't let her get the best of me, I replied, my resolve hardening. The night before the visit, we sat on the living room couch, going through our plan. Derek, she'll try to provoke us. We need to keep calm, no matter what. I'll be right there with you, he reassured, holding my gaze. The day arrived. As we parked outside Vanessa and Brian's lavish suburban home, my heart raced. Derek squeezed my hand. You ready? Yes, I replied, taking a deep breath before we walked to the door. Vanessa greeted us with that overly sweet smile. Emily, Derek, come in, she chirped, but her eyes were calculating. I could see the gears turning in her head. Brian approached, a drink in hand. It's been a long time, Emily. Yes, it has, I replied coolly, meeting his gaze briefly before looking away. The room was filled with guests, laughter, and chatter. Vanessa played the perfect hostess, but there was an edge to her actions. She fluttered between guests, but her eyes kept darting to me. Derek and I mingled, making polite conversation. As the evening wore on, Vanessa approached me, a faux friendly smile plastered on her face. Emily, can we privately? Sure, I said, maintaining a calm exterior as I followed her to a quieter corner. You've moved on, I see, Vanessa said, her tone laced with insincerity. I have, I replied steadily. Good for you, her eyes narrowed. But let's be real, you came here to prove something, didn't you? I met her gaze head on. I came to show you that I'm stronger than you think. Twerma, we'll see about that, she said, a sinister smile crossing her lips. She reached into a nearby drawer and pulled out a small recorder. I have something for you, she said, pressing play. Brian's voice crackled through the speaker. Vanessa, you're right. Emily was too trusting, too naive. My stomach churned, but I kept my face impassive. Nice trick, Vanessa, I commented dryly. She leaned closer. I always knew you were too soft for this world, but look where I am now. Before I could respond, Derek walked up. Everything all right here? He asked, his eyes locking on Vanessa's. Perfect timing, I said, smiling at him. Vanessa's eyes widened. He really is your husband? Derek extended his hand. Derek, CEO of Greenleaf Inc. Nice to meet you, he said smoothly. Vanessa stumbled back, shock and realization crossing her face. Is this for real? Yes, Vanessa, I said, satisfaction dripping from my words. Very real. At that moment, Brian walked over, sensing the tension. What's going on here? Vanessa tried to regain her composure, but it was too late. Derek turned to Brian. We were just discussing how integrity is key in both personal and business relationships. Brian's eyes flicked between us, uncertainty clouding his face. Vanessa? He questioned, looking at her warily. She opened her mouth to retort, but the damage was done. The cracks in her facade were visible. Derek placed a protective arm around me. Let's get going, Emily. Yes, let's, I agreed. We walked out, leaving Vanessa and Brian to deal with the aftermath of their duplicity. In the car, Derek leaned over and kissed my forehead. You did great, Emily. Thanks, I said, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. I think I finally got my closure. With each mile back home, the past drifted further behind us. What lay ahead was a future built on honesty, love, and mutual respect. A future Vanessa could only dream of. The following weekend, it was time to put our plan into action. Derek and I arrived separately. Derek would come a bit later, just as we had rehearsed. I walked up to Vanessa's door, confidence radiating from my every step. She answered with that same disingenuous smile. Emily, alone again? She smirked. I wouldn't be so sure, I replied coolly, stepping inside. The house was filled with the usual gathering of their friends. Vanessa led me to the living room, where Brian was talking with some guests. He looked up, surprise crossing his face. "Emily, good to see you again," he said, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. "Brian," I nodded. Vanessa's eyes darted between us, calculating. "So," she began, addressing the room, "we have a guest tonight. Emily, why don't you say a few words?" The room quieted, all eyes on me. I felt a surge of determination. "Thank you, Vanessa. It's nice to be here among friends," I started, my voice steady. "It's funny how life changes, how people and relationships evolve." Brian shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's smile was tighter. "Oh, we all know about evolving relationships, don't we?" she said sweetly. I continued, unapologetic. "I met Derek a few years ago at a business seminar. He's been my rock ever since. And though we started from scratch, we've come a long way." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. The doorbell rang, a perfectly timed interruption. Derek walked in, immediately drawing the room's attention. "Apologies, traffic was horrendous," he said, making his way to my side. "Derek, CEO of Greenleaf Inc. Nice to finally meet everyone," he added, shaking hands with a few guests. Vanessa's eyes widened in recognition, but she quickly composed herself. "Looks like you weren't lying, Emily," she chuckled, although her eyes betrayed her. The evening continued, and it wasn't long before Vanessa beckoned me to follow her into the study. I glanced at Derek, who nodded slightly. It was time. "Emily, let's have a private chat," she suggested, a hint of malice in her tone. I followed her, entering the cluttered room filled with awards and framed photos. Vanessa shut the door behind us. "So enjoy playing house with your rich husband?" she sneered. "You seem awfully interested in my life, Vanessa," I replied calmly. "Maybe a bit too interested." She walked to a drawer, pulling out the same recorder. "Remember this?" she asked, pressing play, but there was nothing. Her face paled. "What did you do?" "The real question is, what have you done, Vanessa?" I said. Just then, Derek walked in. "Sorry to intrude, but I couldn't help overhearing," he said, stepping beside me. "Vanessa, how many secrets do you have stuffed away in that drawer?" Her face contorted with rage. "You think you can waltz in and disrupt my life?" Derek remained calm. "Your life was built on lies. Time for them to come crashing down." He pulled out his phone, playing a recording where Vanessa was heard whispering multiple indiscretions to different men. It was all laid bare. Vanessa's facade crumbled. "You're destroying me," she hissed. "No, Vanessa, you did that to yourself," I replied, the weight of past betrayals lifting. Brian burst into the room, hearing the tail end of our confrontation. "What is going on?" he demanded. Derek turned to him. "Your wife's been deceiving you far more than you know, Brian." Brian looked at Vanessa, realization and hurt crossing his face. "Is it true?" he asked, voice breaking. Vanessa whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "Brian, I can explain." "Don't. I've heard enough," he interrupted, storming out. Derek took my hand, guiding me out of the study. The guests stood in awkward silence as we made our exit. Outside, Derek turned to me, his eyes full of pride. "You did it, Emily. You faced her." I smiled, a sense of liberation washing over me. We did it together. As we drove away, I couldn't help but feel a tremendous sense of closure. Vanessa's true nature had been exposed, and I was free, ready to embrace the future with Derek, leaving the past well and truly behind. As we left Vanessa's house, the satisfaction of exposing her deceit filled me with a sense of relief. Derek drove us home in silence, his hand firmly holding mine. The weight of the past few months was slowly lifting. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. "Emily, it's Brian," the voice on the other end said, sounding defeated. "What do you want, Brian?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I needed to talk." "Can we meet?" he asked, desperation evident in his voice. "All right, the Red Maple Cafe in an hour," I replied before hanging up. When I arrived, Brian was already seated, looking disheveled and worn out. I sat down across from him. "So what's this about?" I asked. "Vanessa and I had a massive fight last night after you left. She's been lying to me about so many things, affairs, money, everything," he said, rubbing his temples. "She's never been honest, Brian. You chose to ignore the signs," I stated simply. "I know," he admitted, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't know what to do, Emily. My life is falling apart." I looked at him, feeling a mix of pity and frustration. "Brian, the truth is, you let this happen. Vanessa manipulated you because you allowed her. Now you have to decide if you want to change things." he nodded, taking in my words. I've been such a fool. Yes, I agreed, but it's not too late to start over. You need to find your own path, away from Vanessa. Brian took a deep breath. You're right. I'm filing for divorce. I need to rediscover who I am without her. Good luck, Brian, I said sincerely, standing up to leave. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a sense of closure with Brian. It was time to focus on myself and my future with Derek. Later that evening, Derek and I were sitting in our living rooms working on some documents for our company. The atmosphere was peaceful, a sharp contrast to the chaos we'd recently faced. Emily, I got an email from our biggest investor. They want to meet us to discuss expanding our project, Derek said, excitement in his voice. That's amazing news, I replied, sharing his enthusiasm. We've come so far together, Derek said, taking my hand. I couldn't have done it without you. And I couldn't have faced my past without you, I replied, squeezing his hand. The following week, Vanessa's dirty laundry was aired publicly. Social media and local news buzzed with details of her multiple affairs and financial misdeeds. Her world was crumbling. Brian called again, this time to thank me. Emily, I've started the divorce process, he said. I owe it to myself to be better. I'm glad to hear that, Brian. Take care of yourself, I replied, genuinely wishing him well. Vanessa, on the other hand, tried to salvage her ruined reputation. She called me, but I ignored it. Derek and I had more important things to focus on, our future. One evening, as Derek and I walked through a park hand in hand, he stopped and looked at me. Emily, this is just the beginning for us. I can't wait to see what we'll achieve together. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Together, we're unstoppable. As we embraced, the weight of the past finally lifted from my shoulders. The journey had been long and painful, but it had forged something unbreakable between Derek and me. Returning home, we celebrated the victory of stepping into a new chapter of our lives. Our company was gaining momentum, and our relationship was stronger than ever. Derek raised a toast. To new beginnings, he said, his eyes full of promise. To love and resilience, I added, clinking my glass against his. With Derek by my side, I knew we could face whatever challenges lay ahead, leaving the shadows of our past far behind. A few weeks later, the fallout from Vanessa's exposure was still echoing through our small town. Derek and I focused on our work, growing stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I recognized too well. Emily, it's Vanessa. Her voice was weak, a stark contrast to her usual bravado. What do you want, Vanessa? I asked, keeping my tone cold. Meet me. Please, I need to talk, she begged. Why should I? I countered. Just please. I'm at the park near the old library, she said before hanging up. I found her sitting on a bench, looking more gaunt and haunted than ever. She saw me and started to speak. Emily, everything's falling apart. Brian's left. Our finances are a mess. I need help, she pleaded, tears pooling in her eyes. Help? I scoffed. You destroyed my life and expect me to help you? I know I've done terrible things, but I'm desperate, she admitted, her voice breaking. You poisoned everything you touched, Vanessa. This is your mess to clean up, I answered firmly. I'm begging you, Emily. I have no one else, she said, sobbing now. I looked at her, feeling a pang of pity, but reminded myself of the pain she caused. Find a way out yourself, Vanessa. Like you said, I was too naive before. Not anymore. I turned and walked away, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. I called Derek, my anchor in this storm. How did it go? He asked. She's hit rock bottom, I said, relief mixed with a touch of sadness in my voice. You did the right thing, he reassured. Days turned into weeks, and Derek and I continued to push our business forward. One evening, I received a call from our biggest investor. Emily, I'm pleased to inform you that your proposal has been accepted. We are funding your project, the voice on the other end announced. That's fantastic news, I exclaimed, excitement bubbling inside me. Derek overheard and rushed over. What is it? We got the funding, I said, throwing my arms around him. We did it. Derek smiled, a look of pride on his face. I knew we would. Later, we celebrated with close friends and family at our home. Among the guests was Margaret, Derek's mother, who had been a pillar of support. I'm so proud of you both, she said, embracing us. Thank you, Margaret. We wouldn't have done it without your encouragement, I replied, genuinely grateful. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Derek and I found a quiet moment together. This is just the beginning, Derek said, holding my hand. Yes, it is, I agreed, my heart full of hope for the future. The next few months were a whirlwind of meetings, traveling, and growing our business. Our hard work paid off, and soon we celebrated a major milestone with our team. To success, Derek toasted, and to the incredible journey ahead, I added, clinking my glass with his. In the midst of all this, news of Vanessa continued to circulate. She lost her job, her house, and eventually left town in disgrace. The last I heard, she moved back in with her parents, a far cry from the life she once flaunted. One summer afternoon, Derek and I sat in our backyard, reflecting on everything that had transpired. You know, I said thoughtfully, I never imagined we'd get here from where we started. Derek nodded. But we did, Emily. We turned the worst chapters into our greatest strength. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. Thank you, Derek, for everything. We're a team, he replied softly, and together we can face anything. As we watched the sunset, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been tumultuous, but it had led to a place of true happiness and fulfillment. Derek and I were ready for all the new adventures life had in store for us, with the past firmly behind us. Together, we had redefined our path, turning pain into purpose and building a future grounded in mutual respect and love. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all.
Trusted my girlfriend with my mental struggles. She had me put in a psych hold, and now she tell me this. So yeah, I'm not exactly in the best spot right now. I'm 29, working this job that's supposed to pay the bills and give me some sense of purpose. But let's be real, it barely does either. I'm busting my ass for what? To barely scrape by? I'm pretty sure a lot of people reading this get what I'm saying. It's like you're just grinding away, hoping things will get easier, but they don't. And maybe for some people that's just life, right? But for me, it's been different lately, like way darker. I don't know exactly when this whole mental mess started. I mean, I'd love to say I was some super happy dude who suddenly woke up to a bad day and everything went downhill, but it's not that simple. It's more like a slow crawl into this weird dark pit. Like, one day you realize the thoughts you're having aren't just the regular man, this sucks kind of thoughts. They're like, what's the point, you know? And it's terrifying because I don't actually want to hurt myself. I'm not actively planning anything, but my mind keeps going there even when I don't want it to. It's like it's sneaking up on me when I'm not paying attention. It's what they call suicidal ideation, which basically means these thoughts just creep up, even though I have zero plans to actually do anything. I'll try to paint a picture for you because maybe some of you haven't been there, and it might sound overdramatic. It's like this constant weight on my mind. Some days I'd wake up and go to work, go through the motions, but inside it's like a switch flipped. Everything's numb, like I'm just going through the day on autopilot. It's weird because nobody can see it. To everyone else, I'm just the same guy, doing my job, showing up, but inside it's like everything's gray, heavy, and no matter what I do, I can't shake it. I thought I could just push through, honestly. I mean, I've dealt with stress before, right? But this is different. Usually I just throw myself into work, keep busy, try to ignore the bad stuff, and hope it goes away. But no matter how hard I worked or distracted myself, these thoughts just kept creeping back in. It's like trying to keep a lid on a pot that's already boiling over. You can push it down for a while, but eventually it's going to spill. I'd get these thoughts too at the worst times. Like I'm standing at work, supposed to be paying attention, and suddenly my mind's just drifting off, thinking about how easy it'd be to just disappear. And I'd snap out of it, thinking, what the hell is wrong with me? But then it'd happen again, and again. It starts messing with your head. I'd go home and just sit there, trying to figure out why I can't shake it off. Why I can't just, I don't know, be happy? Or at least normal? It's this constant battle in my head and I'm losing. I know, it sounds dramatic. But if you've ever been there, you get it. And if you haven't, trust me when I say it's not something I'd wish on anyone. It's like being trapped in this invisible cage, and no matter what you do, you can't get out. Every day, it's just this fight to keep going, to keep pretending everything's okay when deep down, you know it's not. And the scariest part? I didn't tell anyone, not a single soul, because who wants to hear that? Who wants to be the person that people look at and think, oh, he's broken? So I kept it all in, hoping it'd just go away. And then came the worst days. These are the ones that really stick with me. I'd come home after a long day, exhausted, and just sit there staring at the wall. Not even thinking, just staring. My phone would buzz, people trying to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. It was like every ounce of energy I had was used up just to get through the day, and I had nothing left for anyone else. I'd sit in silence, sometimes for hours, with this voice in the back of my head whispering that it'd be easier to just give up. Not that I'd ever actually do it, but the thought was always there, lurking, like some shadow I couldn't get rid of. After a few months of this, I started to realize that maybe I couldn't handle this on my own. And let me tell you, that was a hard pill to swallow. I've always been the guy who deals with his own stuff, who doesn't rely on anyone else. But this was different. It wasn't something I could just shrug off or ignore. So, after a lot of back and forth in my own head, I finally decided to open up to my girlfriend. I mean, we've been together for 4 years, and she's always been there for me. If there was anyone who'd understand, it'd be her, right? So, one night, we're just sitting on the couch watching some mindless TV show, and I decided to go for it. I told her I'd been struggling lately, that things felt dark, and that I'd been having these thoughts. And let me tell you, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I could barely get the words out. I was so damn worried about how she'd react, but I didn't have anyone else I could trust with this. She just sat there listening, and I thought, okay, maybe this'll actually help. I kept explaining, trying to make her understand that I wasn't planning anything, that I just needed someone to hear me out. And she nodded, said she understood, and I actually felt a bit of relief, like maybe I'd finally found a way to dig myself out of this hole. I thought, maybe this'll be okay, maybe I'll be okay. Looking back, maybe I shouldn't have expected so much. I mean, she's young, only 22, and probably didn't know how to handle something like this. But at that moment, I genuinely thought I'd done the right thing by telling her. For the first time in a while, I felt like maybe I wasn't so alone in this. I thought opening up was the first step to getting better, that I'd finally found a way to deal with these thoughts and move forward. But as I'd come to learn, things weren't that simple. So I left off where I finally opened up to my girlfriend. Honestly, I felt this weird sense of relief after telling her everything, like maybe this was finally the first step to pulling myself out of that mental mess. But what happened next was something I didn't see coming at all. After our talk, I was feeling, I don't know, lighter, I guess. I figured I'd go grab some snacks and clear my head for a bit, so I told her I'd be right back. It was just a quick trip down the street, something to get my mind off things. I thought everything was fine between us, like maybe we'd broken through a wall or something. I wasn't expecting her to do anything drastic. But by the time I came back, the whole situation flipped in a way I'd never imagined. I pull into my driveway and immediately notice 2 cop cars parked outside my house, and I'm just sitting there in my car, staring at these flashing lights, totally confused. My first thought was maybe there was some kind of emergency in the neighborhood or something, but when I got out of the car, one of the officers approached me, and he had this look like he already knew exactly who I was. "Are you my name?" he asks, and I'm just nodding, still not processing any of it. I mean, my heart's racing, and I'm running through every possible thing that could have gone wrong. Then he says, "We got a call from someone concerned for your safety." Right then it clicked. I knew this wasn't about anything outside. It was about me. My girlfriend had called the cops on me, and suddenly that feeling of relief I'd had just a few minutes ago, completely gone. I felt betrayed, like I'd let her into my head, and she'd taken that trust and turned it against me. I tried to explain to the officers that it was a misunderstanding. I told them I wasn't planning on doing anything to myself, that I'd just been going through a rough time, and I'd talk to her about it thinking it'd help. But they weren't hearing any of it. They kept insisting that they were there to help and that it was for my own good. At this point, I was pissed. But what could I do? They told me they were going to take me to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, and it wasn't really up for discussion. I tried to argue, but it was like talking to a wall. One of them said, "Look, we're just here to make sure you're safe." Safe? I'd been sitting in my car, getting snacks, and now I was supposed to be some kind of danger to myself? It didn't make sense, but they didn't care about any of that. They just followed protocol. Then it hits me. If the cops are here, who else did she tell? And right on cue, my phone buzzes. It's my mom, freaking out in a million texts, asking me what's going on, why I'm in such a bad place, and all this stuff. Turns out, my girlfriend had called my parents too. I'm guessing she thought they'd support her decision to call the cops, maybe thinking this was what I needed or whatever. But all I felt was this wave of anger and frustration. The people who were supposed to be there for me, my girlfriend and my family, had somehow all turned into, I don't even know what, but definitely not the support I thought I needed. So there I am, being escorted by the cops to the hospital. I'm sitting in the back of a police car like some criminal, even though I'd done nothing wrong. I'm fuming, but I don't even know who I'm mad at more. My girlfriend for putting me in this mess or myself for thinking I could trust anyone with what I was going through. We get to the hospital, and they bring me to this side area, and the nurse is already there waiting. She starts asking me a bunch of questions about my mental state, how I'm feeling, all that stuff, and I'm sitting there thinking, none of this is real. Like, this whole situation just feels like a twisted joke. I told the nurse straight up that I wasn't planning on hurting myself, that this was all some misunderstanding blown way out of proportion. But she just nods and says, well, we'll need to do a full evaluation to make sure. The whole time, all I could think was how everything just spiraled out of control. I'd opened up to my girlfriend, thinking it would help, and here I was in some cold clinical room being treated like a danger to myself. They took my phone, my wallet, everything. It felt surreal, like I'd somehow lost control of my own life just because I was honest for once. I mean, isn't that what everyone says to do? Talk to someone if you're struggling. But look where that got me. And of course, the waiting game started. I sat in this tiny, uncomfortable room for hours, with nothing to do but replay everything in my head, every thought, every detail of that conversation with my girlfriend. I kept wondering if there was something I could have said differently, something that wouldn't have set off this chain reaction. But no matter how I tried to make sense of it, it just didn't add up. She knew I wasn't actively planning anything, and I thought I'd made that clear. So why call the cops? Why call my parents? Why blow everything up? At some point, a doctor came in and started the whole evaluation process. He was calm, asked me about my thoughts, how long I'd been feeling like this, and all that. I answered as best as I could, but it's hard to explain something you're barely understanding yourself. I could see him jotting down notes, looking up every now and then, and it was obvious he didn't really get it. He kept asking questions in this clinical, detached way that just made me feel even worse. Like I was just another case he was trying to check off his list. By the time they finally wrapped up the initial evaluation, I was drained, both physically and mentally. I didn't have the energy to keep explaining myself, and I just accepted that nobody was really going to understand. They weren't interested in helping. They were just doing what they were supposed to do. Protocol, procedures, checklists. I was just another number to them. I'm not going to lie. Sitting in that room with nothing to do but stare at the walls, I felt betrayed. Completely. I kept thinking about my girlfriend, my family, the people who were supposed to care. I'd trusted them, opened up in a way I'd never done before, and now, here I was, alone in some sterile room, treated like a danger to myself when all I wanted was someone to actually listen, to understand. But instead, I was labeled and sorted into some category, and now they had me stuck in this mess. By the time they told me I'd have to stay for further observation, I wasn't even surprised. It was like the whole thing had taken on a life of its own, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I just sat there, feeling defeated, wondering if I'd ever be able to look at these people in my life the same way again. I'm not sure how to describe the feeling of being admitted into a psych ward, especially when you're there against your will. The second they took my phone and wallet, I realized how little control I had left. You think of hospitals as these places where they're supposed to help you, right? Well, this place didn't feel like help. It felt like prison. Everything was cold and gray, like the entire building was designed to drain whatever hope you had left. And the people? They treated you like you were already broken beyond repair. After what felt like hours of waiting around, they finally brought me to this cramped room that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. It had a single bed with a thin mattress, a chair, and a tiny table. The walls were this faded beige color, peeling in spots, and there was this smell, a mix of bleach and something stale. I sat on the bed, staring at the walls, trying to wrap my head around how I'd ended up here. The staff, they didn't talk to you unless they absolutely had to. It's like they didn't see you as a person. Just another case they were dealing with. I tried asking one of the nurses how long I'd have to be here, and she just shrugged, mumbled something about evaluations, and walked away. No explanations, no real answers, just cold, blank stares and people moving around like you're invisible. Then came the worst part. My roommate. I don't know what I expected, but definitely not him. The guy was convinced he was some kind of god or prophet or something, always muttering to himself and occasionally screaming at the walls. First night in, I woke up to him smashing his head against the wall, leaving these bloody smears as he went. When I asked the staff if he was okay, they just brushed it off like it was no big deal. He does that sometimes, one of them said, completely unfazed. The whole experience was like that. There was no peace, no privacy, nothing that made you feel even a little bit human. The light stayed on 24/7, and someone checked on you every half hour, so sleep was impossible. I'd lie there, exhausted but unable to drift off, listening to the sounds of other patients shuffling down the hall, doors creaking, and that constant hum of fluorescent lights. Every noise, every shadow, it was like the place was designed to keep you on edge. Meals were another level of awful. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were all this tasteless gray mush that they insisted was balanced. I tried eating it first, but I could barely get it down. After a day or so, I just stopped bothering. What was the point? It felt like I was being punished, like I'd done something wrong, even though all I'd done was open up to someone I thought I could trust. And then there were the meds. Oh man, the meds. The doctors had decided I needed something to calm me down, despite me telling them over and over that I wasn't a danger to myself. But it didn't matter. They had their system, and I was just another tick on their checklist. They handed me these pills without even telling me what they were. When I refused to take them, they just stared at me and said, "You either take these, or we'll have to use other measures." Basically, they were going to force feed me the stuff if I didn't cooperate. So yeah, I took them. And let me tell you, whatever they gave me, it was brutal. Within half an hour, I felt like my brain was wrapped in cotton. Everything was blurry and slow. I couldn't think straight. Couldn't even string together a full sentence. It was like I was floating somewhere outside myself, watching this whole nightmare unfold, but completely powerless to do anything about it. They'd call it treatment, but to me, it felt like they were stripping away any shred of control I had left. I spent 3 days in that place. 3 long, miserable days where the only thing I did was sit in that dingy room and stare at the walls. The staff tried to get me to talk, but I wasn't interested. I knew they weren't listening. Not really. I'd already told them the truth, but they didn't care. I was just another body they had to deal with. So I clammed up, refused to speak, and just waited for it to be over. On the second day, my parents and girlfriend came by to visit. I saw them through the tiny window in my room, talking to one of the nurses, probably asking to see me. But I didn't want to see them. I was done with them. They were the ones who put me here, who decided this was what I needed, without even asking me how I felt about it. So when the nurse came to tell me I had visitors, I just shook my head and said I wasn't interested. I could see the nurse's face drop, like maybe she thought I was being ungrateful or something. But I didn't care. I was angry. Angry at all of them for thinking they knew what was best for me. Angry that I'd let myself trust them enough to open up, only to have it backfire in the worst way possible. They didn't understand, and at that point, I wasn't sure I even wanted them to. Time felt strange in that place. It was like everything slowed down and blurred together. Hours felt like days, and every second I was there, I felt more and more trapped. It was like being in some kind of twisted purgatory where you're just stuck with no way out. The only thing that kept me going was knowing that eventually, they'd have to let me go. I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't a danger to myself, and they had no proof to keep me there. By the end of it, I was so mentally and physically drained that I barely recognized myself. I felt hollow, like whatever fight I had in me had been worn down to nothing. The doctors finally decided they didn't have enough to keep me any longer, and they told me I'd be released soon. But even then, they acted like they were doing me some kind of favor, like I should be grateful they were letting me go. All I could think was, I just want out. I wanted out of that place, away from those people, and as far from the whole experience as possible. They'd turned what was already a rough time in my life into something way worse, all because I trusted the wrong person. And as they took me out of that room and walked me down those bleak hallways one last time, I made up my mind about one thing. I was done with all of them. When they finally let me out, it wasn't some big relief like I thought it would be. I felt numb, like whatever part of me that should have felt grateful for being free had been left back in that psych ward. They handed me my stuff, my wallet, my phone, like I was some kid who'd just been punished and was finally allowed to go back outside. But the second I took my things, I just wanted to leave. I didn't say a word to any of the staff, didn't even look back. I was done with them, done with that place. And of course, there they were, waiting for me outside, my parents and my girlfriend. They all had these expressions like they were relieved but also worried, and I could already see it. The questions, the "Are you okay?" and "Did it help?" expressions written all over their faces. But I wasn't about to play into that. I'd already been through enough. I didn't owe them anything. They all started talking at once the second they saw me. My mom was asking if I was okay. My dad tried to give me one of those weird side hugs, and my girlfriend was going on about how she'd missed me, how she was glad I was safe now. And honestly, I just couldn't take it. I felt this wave of anger bubble up inside me. All I could see was them making that choice for me, deciding what was best without even listening. They'd thrown me in there like I was some project they needed to fix, and now they wanted me to pretend like everything was fine. I didn't say a word to them. Not one. I just brushed past them, started walking away. They kept calling my name, asking where I was going, but I didn't stop. I had too much going on in my head to even care at that point. I just kept walking, barely noticing that it had started to rain. Somehow, that felt right, like the whole world was matching my mood. Heavy, gray, cold. I didn't even care about the rain soaking through my clothes. It was like, after everything, getting wet was the least of my problems. I must have walked a good 3 miles before I finally got back to my place. I hadn't stopped once, hadn't even thought about getting a ride or calling a cab. I just walked, letting the anger and hurt push me forward, one step after another, until I made it back. By the time I reached my door, I was drenched and exhausted, but something about that walk felt like it cleared my head a bit. Or maybe I just pushed everything so deep down that it was like I couldn't feel anything anymore. Either way, I didn't care. I was home, and that's all that mattered. When I stepped inside, my girlfriend had followed me. I hadn't even noticed she'd trailed me back, but there she was, dripping wet, looking at me like I was some kind of wounded animal. "We need to talk," she said, but I was done with talking. I'd already said everything that mattered back when I'd opened up to her, and look where that got me. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her justifications. I didn't want to hear any of it. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "We're done." Just like that. No explanation, no trying to soften the blow. I was exhausted, drained, and I didn't have the energy to play nice. She started to cry, saying she'd done what she thought was best, that she'd only wanted to help me. But her idea of help had been throwing me in a psych ward without even asking me what I wanted. How was that supposed to help? How was I supposed to feel safe with someone who could just decide what's best for me like that, without even a real conversation? I told her she had until the end of the week to pack her stuff and get out of my house. It felt harsh, but at that moment I didn't care. She kept trying to explain, kept going on about how much she cared about me, but I'd heard enough. I'd trusted her, thought she'd understand what I was going through, and instead, she'd turned my life upside down. Maybe some people would say I was being too hard on her, but if they'd been through what I had, they'd get it. You can't just throw someone into a place like that and expect things to go back to normal afterward. After she finally left, I sat there in my empty apartment staring at the walls. It was quiet, so damn quiet, and for the first time I really let myself feel the weight of everything. All the anger, the betrayal, it all hit me at once. I felt alone, but in a way it was better than pretending to be surrounded by people who didn't really care about what I wanted. They'd all acted like they were helping me, but none of them had actually asked me what I needed. They just made that choice for me, like I wasn't even there. My phone started buzzing with texts from my parents, probably worried that I'd cut off my girlfriend like that, but I didn't even look at them. I was done. I'd spent so much time trying to make everyone else happy, trying to play nice, that I'd forgotten what it meant to actually look out for myself. And now, after everything, I didn't have the energy to deal with their guilt trips and their explanations. Over the next few days, my parents kept trying to call, sending these long, guilt-laden texts about how my girlfriend was just trying to help, how I should forgive her, give her another chance. They couldn't get it. They'd never understand what it was like to be locked up in that place, treated like I was broken just because I was struggling. I knew they thought they were doing the right thing, but to me, it felt like they'd taken the one thing I had left, my right to decide what I wanted for myself, and thrown it away. By the end of the week, my girlfriend had packed up her things and left. I didn't say goodbye, didn't even look at her when she walked out the door. I was past that. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. It was like a part of me had died back there, in that psych ward, the part that believed people could understand without judgment, without trying to control me. I didn't need people who thought they knew better than I did what was best for me. I didn't realize how freeing it would feel to finally set that boundary, to tell the people who had hurt me that they didn't get to decide my life anymore. Yeah, it left me alone, but at least I was alone on my own terms. And as strange as it sounds, that gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. So now I'm sitting here, finally by myself, and I can't shake this question. Was I the A*** hole? I mean, I'm aware this whole situation's messed up. I'm not blind to the fact that they thought they were helping me. My girlfriend, my parents, they did what they did because they care. I get that, okay? But it still feels like they all just completely bulldozed over me, over what I wanted and needed, and now I'm left with nothing but this huge mess, and everyone around me telling me I'm wrong. It's like they thought they knew best, right? My girlfriend especially. I told her some really personal stuff I hadn't even really admitted to myself, and she took that as a green light to call the cops on me. I mean, who does that? She knew I wasn't planning to do anything drastic. I'd told her clear as day that I was struggling, but not actually in danger. And instead of actually listening to what I needed, she just went nuclear and dragged my family into it too, thinking that would somehow help. And my parents, man, they acted like they were so surprised, like they couldn't believe I was going through something like this. But I don't know. Part of me feels like they should have seen the signs. They know how rough work has been, how I've been drowning in bills, how every day has felt like a struggle lately. It's not like I'm hiding that part of my life. I mean, I live paycheck to paycheck. They knew that. They knew my job's been grinding me down. And when it finally got too heavy, and I reached out, they all acted like I was a problem that needed fixing, rather than just someone who needed a bit of understanding. So now I've cut everyone off. My girlfriend's gone, and I've blocked my parents' numbers. I made it clear that if they keep pushing, I'll go to the cops for trespassing. And yeah, I know that sounds extreme. I'm aware that to anyone else, I probably sound like a guy who's lost it. But if you'd been through what I went through, you'd get it. When the people you trust most decide that their version of help involves locking you up, it changes things. It changes how you see them and how you see yourself. And then there's the money side of things. Because, of course, insurance didn't cover my little trip to the psych ward. So now, on top of everything else, I'm saddled with a $10,000 bill for something I never wanted, never asked for, and definitely didn't need. Every time I think about it, it makes my blood boil. Like, I was already buried in bills, struggling to make ends meet, and now I have this giant debt sitting over my head because my girlfriend thought she was saving me. If I didn't laugh, I'd cry, honestly. People keep telling me I should reach out to the hospital, try to get the bill reduced. I get it. It's practical advice. But the whole idea of even dealing with them again just fills me with dread. I don't want to talk to anyone there. Don't want to relive any of it. It's like that place left this scar. And every time I think about doing something about the bill, it just reopens. Maybe it sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth. Right now, I'd rather let that bill sit unpaid than have to explain myself to some billing department that probably doesn't care anyway. And then there's the question of what comes next. Because I'm sitting here with pretty much no support system left. I'm on my own, and that's fine. It's better than having people around who don't actually get it. But there's this nagging thought in the back of my head, this tiny, annoying voice saying, what if they were right? What if you were overreacting? And I hate that thought, because it makes me doubt everything. It's like they've got this grip on me, even after I've pushed them all away. Like no matter what I do, I can't fully escape their version of help. A few days ago, I was scrolling through Reddit, trying to distract myself, and I came across a post from someone else who'd gone through something similar. They talked about feeling betrayed by the people closest to them, about how nobody actually understood what they needed. And I swear, it was like looking in a mirror. I wanted to reach through the screen and tell them I got it, that I knew exactly how they felt. It made me wonder if maybe I'm not as alone in this as I think. Maybe there are other people out there who've been through the same crap, who've had their trust shattered by the people they thought were supposed to care. But at the end of the day, that's all online. None of those people know me, and I don't know them. And as much as it helps to know that others get it, it doesn't really solve anything. I'm still here, still alone, still carrying this weight that nobody else seems to understand. And maybe that's my new reality. Maybe it's just me now, figuring things out one day at a time. I keep replaying that day in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently. Maybe if I'd explained things better, made it clearer that I just needed someone to listen, none of this would have happened. Or maybe it was inevitable. Maybe they would have done this no matter how I'd framed it because they couldn't see past their own fear. I don't know. And maybe I'll never know. All I know is that now, I'm the one left dealing with the fallout. So here I am, asking the internet, am I the a-hole for cutting them all off? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like the only option I had left. I mean, if I can't trust the people who were supposed to have my back, then what's the point? I'm not going to keep them around just to make myself feel better. I need people in my life who actually listen, who see me as more than just a problem to fix. And if that means going it alone for now, so be it. Maybe one day I'll be ready to let them back in. Maybe, when enough time has passed, I'll be able to look back and see things differently. But right now, I'm still angry, still hurt, and still carrying that $10,000 reminder of their help. So was I the A** hole for saying enough is enough? Because honestly, I don't think I am. But I'm open to hearing what you guys think.
I pulled into the driveway of Tristan's house, heart swelling with excitement to surprise my sweet grandson Eli on his 8th birthday. Little did I know the surprise would be entirely mine, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son and daughter-in-law. The doorbell went unanswered after several rings, so I tried the handle. Unlocked. Hello? Tristan? Nadia? I called out, letting myself inside. An eerie silence blanketed the house, normally filled with the laughter and pitter-patter of little feet. A muffled whimper drew me towards the staircase. Under the stairs, a small door caught my eye, the kind meant for storage, not for... No, the thought was too horrifying to entertain. Eli? Honey, are you in there? I gasped, chest tightening. Grandma? His tiny voice trembled from behind the door. Help me, please. With shaking hands, I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind, each more disturbing than the next. I steadied myself against the wall, guilt and dread crashing over me in waves for not visiting sooner. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a toolbox and grabbed a hammer, my fragile grasp on composure crumbling. Stand back, sweetie. 3 solid strikes, and the flimsy door splintered open. There he was, my beautiful grandson, cowering in the dimly lit space, eyes wide with fear and relief. Tears stained his pale cheeks, his vibrant red hair matted and unkempt. Oh, Eli. I choked out, scooping him into my arms, cradling him close. He clung to me with a desperation that broke my heart into pieces. I'm so sorry, I mumbled into his hair, cursing myself for 1,000 should-haves and could-haves. His small body trembled like a leaf against me. Once the initial shock subsided, a burning rage replaced the sorrow. How could Tristan and Nadia do this? What kind of parents? No, what kind of human beings? It's okay, honey, you're safe now, I assured him, doing my best to keep my tone even and soothing, despite the maelstrom within. Can you tell me how long? He shook his head fiercely, eyes squeezed shut as if to block out the memories. Too long. Days, I think. I'd yell and bang, but they never came. Just slid food under sometimes. White-hot fury coursed through my veins, and I silently vowed to ensure Tristan and Nadia paid for this unforgivable cruelty towards their own flesh and blood. But first, I needed to get Eli out of this house of horrors. Pack a bag. Anything you want to take with you. We're leaving. My tone brooked no argument. He nodded obediently, looking smaller and frailer than any child should. By the time I'd calmed down enough to call Tristan, the rage had crystallized into a cold, hard knot of determination in my gut. He picked up after several rings, utterly nonchalant, like he hadn't just committed one of the worst betrayals a parent could. Hi, Mom. What's up? Those 3 words, spoken so casually, were the spark that ignited my fury into an inferno. What do you mean, what's up? I snarled into the phone, my fury simmering just below the surface. I'm at your house, and I just found Eli locked in a closet under the stairs. There was a brief pause, and I could practically see Tristan's nonchalant shrug through the phone. So, that's just how we discipline him when he misbehaves. He knows the rules. My jaw dropped, revulsion churning in my gut. How could he be so callous about treating his own son like a prisoner? You can't be serious, Tristan. He's just a little boy. Don't you dare try to tell me how to parent my own kid, Mom. His voice took on an unpleasant edge. You're overreacting as usual. He's fine, just throwing one of his tantrums. Overreacting? You locked your 8-year-old child in a cramped, dark space for days with barely any food or human contact. What's wrong with you? I was practically shouting now, anger and disbelief warring within me. We have it under control, he said with an infuriating calmness that made my blood boil. This doesn't concern you. Stay out of it. I opened my mouth to unleash another verbal lashing, but the dial tone cut me off. He'd hung up. Chest heaving, I stared at my trembling hands as a chilling realization crept over me. This was no one-time disciplinary tactic gone too far. The way Tristan had spoken, so coldly and matter-of-fact, hinted at something much more sinister. An ingrained pattern of cruelty, of depriving an innocent child of his basic rights and needs. Shaking my head, I leaned back against the wall, fighting against the swell of nausea. How could my own son, my flesh and blood, be capable of such monstrous behavior? What kind of person had he become while I wasn't watching? Unbidden, memories flickered through my mind. Happy childhood moments, Tristan's bright smile and pealing laughter as we baked cookies or played in the yard. It felt like a lifetime ago, those echoes of the warm, loving boy I'd raised. Where had I gone wrong? What had warped and twisted him into this shell of a man? Or had the seeds of cruelty lurked beneath the surface all along, only to bloom once I looked away? A tiny sniffle made me jerk upright. Eli stood in the hallway, bag clutched to his chest, eyes rimmed with fresh tears. Of course, he'd overheard every ugly word. Crossing the room in 2 long strides, I gathered him into my arms, murmuring soft, soothing words into his hair. "It's gonna be okay, honey. I'm gonna make sure they never ever hurt you again." And in that moment, as his small arms wound around my neck, my path became clear. No more agonizing over where Tristan had strayed. It didn't matter now. He was beyond reach, beyond saving maybe. But Eli, that sweet, innocent little boy, still had a chance at a decent life. A life full of kindness, love, and stability that every child deserved. Even if it meant waging war against my own son, I would stop at nothing to rescue him from this nightmare. Settling Eli into the passenger seat, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you pick a movie for us to watch at my place? Something with happy endings." He nodded, mustering up a watery grin that tugged at my heart. In that moment, I made a silent vow. By the time we reached our happy ending, Tristan would face the consequences for his unforgivable crimes. No matter what it took, I would make sure of it. The drive back to my place was a blur, my mind spinning with half-formed plans of how to handle the situation with Tristan and Nadia. One thing was certain, I couldn't take them on alone. I needed allies. My first call was to Dale, my estranged husband. We'd fallen out of touch over the years, our marriage slowly eroding until the distance became a chasm. But he was still Eli's grandfather, and I had to hope some shred of paternal instinct remained. "Dale, it's Lorraine," I said when he picked up, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I need your help with something." There was a pregnant pause, then a resigned sigh. "What is it this time?" Clenching my jaw, I willed myself to remain calm. "It's about Eli, our grandson." That seemed to get his attention. "Go on." The words came tumbling out in a breathless rush. Eli's captivity, Tristan's shocking dismissal of it all, my own fears for the boy's well-being. To his credit, Dale listened in stone-faced silence until I finally trailed off. "You're telling me our son had his own kid locked up, like some kind of prisoner?" His voice was dangerously low. "Yes." I glanced over at Eli, slumped against the window in an exhausted sleep. And judging by how casual Tristan was about it, I don't think this was the first time. Another heavy pause then. "That's it. I'm calling the cops. We'll have those 2 psychos arrested for child endangerment." "Wait," I cut him off sharply. As satisfying as that idea was, it felt too rash, too risky. "We can't go to the authorities until we have rock-solid proof. You know how the system can fail kids." "So what do you suggest?" My gaze settled on Eli's sleeping form, and a steely resolve solidified within me. We need to investigate on our own first, figure out exactly what's going on, and gather evidence of any wrongdoing, so it's airtight. "You want us to perform a full background check on our own son?" Dale sounded skeptical. "On both of them," I clarified grimly. "There has to be some explanation for why they're treating Eli so horrendously. We find that, we'll get to the bottom of this whole mess." A heavy silence then. "Fine, but not because I care about that boy's welfare anymore." His voice dripped with disdain. "Just because he's my grandson, you know, bloodline and all that." I bristled at his callousness, but bit back a scathing retort. I'd deal with Dale's indifference towards Eli later. For now, I had to play along if I wanted a hope of gaining his help. "Okay then, we start digging into their lives first thing tomorrow. Finances, personal records, everything. No stone left unturned." Dale grunted in assent. "And if we find anything?" A burst of vindictive satisfaction surged through me. "Then we make them pay." The next few days passed by in a whirlwind of information gathering. Between my tenacious research skills and Dale's business connections, we slowly unpicked every tangled thread of Tristan and Nadia's lives. Their finances were in shambles, racked with debt and comic strings of bad investments. A large portion of debt seemed tied to Nadia's previous marriage, which ended messily and likely cost a small fortune in legal fees. Speaking of her ex, I made a point to track him down. The details he shared painted an ugly picture of Nadia's past: accusations of infidelity, substance abuse, even violence. Could she still be clinging to those toxic patterns? As for Tristan, there were signs of shady business dealings and despicable con artistry. Several former employers and partners had fallen victim to his schemes over the years. Had he been grooming Eli as his next payday? "You think they've been stealing from the kid?" Dale wondered grimly when I shared my suspicions. Seems like the type of lowlife move they'd pull. I clenched my jaw, a wave of nausea crashing over me. The more I learned, the more monstrous my own son and daughter-in-law became. Raking a hand through my hair, I turned to face Dale with a look of grim determination. Well, we can't let them get away with it any longer. It's time we put an end to their sick games. With our findings laid out before us, Dale and I began plotting our next moves. We had more than enough damning evidence against Tristan and Nadia. Now it was a matter of using it effectively. We could release it all to the media, let them crucify those two jackals in the court of public opinion, Dale suggested with relish. I shook my head, worrying my bottom lip. As satisfying as that would be, we can't. Not yet. It would just put Eli in the crosshairs and make him the victim all over again. Then what? Take it to the cops like I originally suggested? Exhaling slowly, I considered our options. Going through official channels could mean months of legal red tape and he said, she said battles. Meanwhile, Eli would suffer. No, we needed a surefire way to take them down swiftly while securing his safety, a way to force their hand and back them into a corner with no escape. I have a friend, I began slowly. From law school, Martha Wilkins. She's made a career handling cases just like this one. Crooked parents trying to milk their kids' inheritance, neglect, you name it. Understanding dawned in Dale's eyes. So you'll get this hotshot lawyer lady to put the screws to Tristan and Nadia? Air all their dirty laundry in court? Among other things, I replied cryptically. Help me gather up all the paperwork. I'll set up a meeting with Martha for tomorrow. Martha's office was as sleek and professional as I remembered, though her warm smile and sharp eyes were the same as ever. Lorraine, it's been too long. She enveloped me in a brief hug before guiding us to a pair of leather chairs. Though I must say, I wish our reunion was under better circumstances. With a sigh, I waved a hand at the boxes of files surrounding us. That's an understatement. Take a look at what we've uncovered about my son and daughter-in-law. For the next 2 hours, Martha pored over our findings with her trademark meticulous intensity. Her brow furrowed deeper with each new layer of depravity revealed, the financial deceptions, signs of blatant neglect, even the account from Nadia's ex-husband. I've heard of money-grubbing parents before, she muttered, shaking her head in disgust. But keeping their own child as a literal prisoner in the name of fleecing his trust fund? That's a new low, even for me. Unconsciously, my fists clenched in my lap. So you'll take the case? Do everything in your power to make sure Tristan and Nadia face the consequences? You don't even need to ask. Martha's expression was one of grim resolve. I'll call in every favor I can to push this through the courts at top speed. We'll bury those two beneath an avalanche of evidence before they know what hit them. She leaned back, fixing me with an intent look. But I'll need your help, too. As Eli's closest living relatives, your testimony and cooperation will be instrumental. I met her gaze steadily. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes to protect that boy. A ghost of a smile played across Martha's lips. That's what I wanted to hear. Over the next few weeks, a whirlwind of depositions, documentation, and strategy sessions consumed every free moment. Martha was ruthlessly efficient, anticipating every possible angle of defense Tristan and Nadia might attempt. At her urging, I took steps to be appointed as Eli's legal guardian, should we wrest him from their custody. It was a lengthy, draining process, but I gladly endured it all with the goal of giving him a stable home in sight. When at last the court date arrived, armed with a veritable armory of evidence, and flanked by Martha's wily paralegal team, I felt an odd sense of calm. The fireworks would come soon enough. Are you sure you want to do this today? Dale eyed me sidelong as we strode up the courthouse steps, Eli's small hand encased in mine. In front of the whole family, on his birthday of all days? My jaw set in a stubborn line. It has to be today. They've had this coming for too long. In truth, I'd chosen this date and venue very deliberately. Our entire extended clan would be gathered at Tristan and Nadia's place for Eli's 8th birthday party later. What better way to expose their sins against their own flesh and blood than surrounded by all those they'd deceived? I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they realized the Negligent Parents of the Year award was theirs. Sure enough, my son and daughter-in-law were already seated with the rest of the family when we arrived, the perfect picture of domestic bliss. A tide of expectant murmurs washed over the crowd as the group recognized Martha striding in behind us. Nadia was the first to spot us, her perfectly curated smile slipping ever so slightly. "What's going on here?" Tristan rose to his feet, all artificial joviality. "I should be asking you three the same thing. What's with the hostility, Mom?" Draping a supportive arm around Eli's shoulders, I leveled him with a look that could cut glass. "Maybe you should ask your son about hostility." Confusion rippled through the assembled guests, but Nadia merely rolled her eyes in condescending amusement. "For God's sake, Lorraine, not this again." "Shut your mouth," Dale growled, and I started slightly at the venom in his tone. "You don't get to dismiss her concerns after the sick crap you two pulled." Murmurs intensified, tinged with disbelief and unease. Martha stepped forward, cool and unruffled, as she spread a series of damning dossiers across the table. "We have extensive documentation of your actions towards Elijah, including willful neglect, financial exploitation of his trust fund, and the unjustified deprivation of basic needs." She gestured for silence as shocked gasps erupted around the room. "I'll skip the niceties and give you one opportunity to start making amends. Full custody of the boy will be transferred to Mrs. Hawthorne here immediately, pending the court's final ruling. You'll also repay every cent you siphoned from his accounts." There was a beat of stunned silence as the words sank in. Twin looks of abject horror twisted Tristan and Nadia's faces before morphing into snares of rage. "You've got to be freaking kidding me." Tristan slammed his hands on the table, making several guests jump. "Just because Mom had some stupid delusions about our parenting? You're blowing this way out of proportion. Get off your high horses, both of you." Nadia jutted her chin haughtily, a studied mask of disdain falling into place to conceal her panic. "Our finances are none of your business, nor how we raise our son." My heart clenched at the way she refused to acknowledge Eli as her own. Martha arched an unimpressed eyebrow. "So I'll take that as a refusal to cooperate, then?" "You're damn right." Tristan looked about 2 seconds from vaulting over the table. "We don't have to listen to your self-righteous garbage." On the contrary. Another folder landed on the table with a thud, and the image of a familiar dingy room, harshly illuminated, filled the screen. "You'll find this garbage quite enlightening, I think." A collective gasp rang out through the room as the grim reality set in. Surveillance footage of the tiny closet space where Eli had been imprisoned for days. His tear-stained face and muffled cries were plain as day, surrounded by harsh shadows and stifling walls. Tristan went ashen, mouth working soundlessly as Nadia slumped against her seat, hand fluttering to her mouth. I ground my teeth, fighting back the urge to throttle them both then and there. How dare they look so appalled now, after willingly inflicting such cruel conditions on their own child? The outrage poured forth from our friends and relatives in waves of angry shouting that drowned out all my instincts for vengeance. Because in that moment, the devastated look in Eli's eyes was all I could focus on. He didn't deserve any of this ugly airing of family secrets and toxic legacy of betrayal that wasn't his shame to carry. At that moment, I was fiercely glad Martha had taken charge. Her pragmatic ruthlessness spared Eli from having to witness our blistering condemnations of the parents who had so grievously failed him. No, he'd been through enough ugliness. It was time to start looking towards a future of healing. Gathering his slight form against me, I murmured low reassurances into his hair as the chaos swirled around us. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the beginning of something new, I realized with a surge of hope. A road towards redemption, away from this poisoned legacy of cruelty and neglect. Tristan and Nadia might have been battles lost, but the war for Eli's soul was just getting started. And this time, I was determined to win. The aftermath of our dramatic confrontation was a whirlwind that still makes my head spin in retrospect. Martha wasted no time, pressing her advantage with cold precision while Tristan and Nadia floundered. Within hours, emergency custody papers were signed and law enforcement was on the scene. Nadia dissolved into hysterics as they slapped cuffs on her wrists, shrieking invectives that would have made a sailor blush. Tristan, for his part, maintained a seething, sullen silence right up until they separated them for booking. Then the dam broke. Staring at me with undisguised loathing, he fought against the officer's restraints like a rabid dog. "You did this!" he snarled, spittle flying. "You poisoned everything with your deluded vendetta." "Your actions poisoned this family," I shot back, unflinching even as Dale shifted protectively in front of Eli. "Maybe if you hadn't been so reckless with your son's well-being, so blind to anything but your greed." "He's not yours anymore," Tristan continued ranting, words slurring as his anger spiraled into near incoherency. "You don't get to sweep in and play hero after years of being a lousy, inattentive gur." The backhanded blow caught him square across the jaw, snapping his head sideways with a meaty thwack. Even the officers gave Dale a wide berth as he towered over Tristan's crumpled form, chest heaving like a bellows. "Don't you dare talk about what kind of grandparent she is," he growled through gritted teeth. "When your own twisted minds led you to torment an innocent child for money." Silence fell, heavy as a pall. Tristan glared up at his father through a mask of bloody spittle and swelling flesh, the fight temporarily beaten out of him. With a last contemptuous sneer, Dale shouldered past the stunned officers and came to collect Eli and me. "You did the right thing," he murmured gruffly into my hair as we embraced, the closest to affection he could muster in that moment. "That boy's better off with anyone but those two excuses for human beings." I squeezed him fiercely, the adrenaline high from the confrontation, rapidly waning to leave me drained, yet perversely buoyed by our victory. It was done. Eli was finally truly safe. All that remained was ensuring he got the love and care he deserved going forward. And that, I silently vowed, was a battle I would fight with every last breath. With the initial crisis resolved, a strange sort of limbo settled over us in the following weeks. Though the custody papers granted me temporary guardianship of Eli, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. I lost track of how many legal meetings, court dates, and blistering cross-examinations Martha put us through. Every shred of Tristan and Nadia's elaborate tangle of lies was meticulously unpicked, cauterized, and readied as exhibits. The fraud charges alone were damning, given the paper trail of diverted funds from Eli's trust account. But Martha assured me that the abuse charges, locking him away for days at a time, withholding food and necessities, would inevitably result in the maximum sentence. "The system doesn't take kindly to parents who view their own offspring as caged commodities," she said grimly. "We'll see they're made examples of." I could only nod, ignoring the unsettling relish in her tone. Personal feelings aside, Martha was a ruthless ally in this fight, and I wasn't about to argue with results. For his part, Eli remained a subdued shadow throughout the proceedings. Despite our best efforts, he shied away from counseling and group activities, haunted eyes downcast whenever Tristan or Nadia's names arose. "It's going to take time for those wounds to heal," Dale cautioned whenever I fretted over the boy's withdrawal. And rationally, I knew he was right. Overcoming the trauma and emotional scarring inflicted by one's own parents couldn't be undone overnight. But that comprehension did little to ease the mounting guilt and worry gnawing at my heart. Had I failed Eli by not recognizing the signs sooner? All these years of missing holidays and birthdays, could I ever make that up to him now? The answers didn't come easily. But bit by bit, through patience and stubborn determination on both our parts, the walls began to show hairline cracks. It started small. Eli timidly agreeing to color with me one quiet afternoon, while Dale watched his loud courtroom shows, as oblivious to our bonding as ever. From there, we progressed to games of Go Fish and Crazy Eights, my genuine laughter at his horrendous bluffing faces earning the first tiny quirks of his lips. Before long, laughter and chattiness seeped back into the house like a palliative balm after the rolling darkness. I introduced Eli to swimming, his initial trepidation melting into uninhibited glee as he cut through the waters with strong, sure strokes. An art class yielded the first vibrant, unrestrained streaks of color across fresh canvases, and through it all, the fragile bond between us grew stronger with each new smile, each peal of laughter replaying in my mind like a soothing melody. The boy I'd feared was too wounded to recover, blossomed with each day of freedom from his parents' toxic influence. There were still bad days, of course. Triggers that sent Eli retreating into a pensive shell of himself for hours or even days at a time. But we weathered those storms together, side by side, and emerged stronger for it in the end. On one such day, The sun had long since set beyond the den's picture windows before Eli stirred from his hunched position on the couch. Rubbing his eyes, he shuffled over and wordlessly crawled into my lap, nestling against me in a contented silence. My breath caught as my arms instinctively folded around his small frame, marveling at the implicit trust in his actions. Setting my chin atop his tousled curls, I let out a shaky sigh, gathering the shreds of composure that loneliness and fresh memories of Tristan's cruelty had frayed. In that moment, gently rocking my grandson, I could scarcely believe how far we'd come. Him from that haunted, hollowed-out husk I'd first beheld in the closet, and me from the guilt-racked woman tormented over failing to prevent his suffering. Holding this quietly content child, bruised but not broken by the ugliness he'd endured, filled me with a sense of purpose more profound than I'd ever known. Scars would remain, but they didn't have to define him or me. All that mattered now was nurturing the resilience and fighting spirit, persevering against all odds. And that was a battle. I vowed silently into the stillness that I would fight beside him every single day until my last breath. The night of the sentencing hearing was one I'll never forget. Tristan and Nadia were led in wearing matching orange jumpsuits, hands and feet shackled. Where Nadia had her head bowed in sullen defeat, Tristan met my gaze head-on, with undisguised hatred burning in his eyes. I returned it with a look of cold indifference. He no longer had any power to rattle me. Martha stood ramrod straight beside us, lips pressed into a thin line of grim satisfaction as the judge entered. She'd cautioned us against expecting the maximum sentences, but her reputation preceded her. I had a feeling the so-called justice system wouldn't dare cross her. And I was right. After a mercifully brief recounting of the relevant facts, the hammer came down harder than I dared hope. For the crimes of child abuse, neglect, fraud, and embezzlement against a minor child's trust fund, I sentence you both to 15 years imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Nadia swayed on her feet as if struck, complexion going deathly pale. But my eyes were locked on Tristan, drinking in the dismay and impotent fury twisting his features into an ugly rictus. Additionally, you will be compelled to make full restitution of the stolen funds to Mr. Elijah Hawthorne upon your release. Failure to comply will result in an extension of your sentences. Martha's shark-like smile was triumphant as she caught my eye amid the courtroom din, mouthing, "I told you so." She'd played her gambit flawlessly, as always. Tristan was still yelling his outrage as he was hauled away, vitriol spewing from his lips. But the hatred in his eyes when they met mine burned itself into my memory, searing and indelible. I refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching away, because in the end, he and Nadia were the ones vanquished, beaten at their own twisted game by the family whose bond they'd tried to shatter. It was a lesson I hoped haunted their every waking moment behind bars. Eli watched the whole proceeding in numb silence. I ached to pull him close, to shield him from the ugliness being laid so cruelly bare. But he was no longer a scared little boy. He'd borne witness to the depths of human cruelty and prevailed through courage and resilience. This was closure, plain and simple. One last look at the monsters who'd tried so viciously to break him before leaving them behind forever. The drive home passed in a blur, none of us speaking. What words could encapsulate the profound shift this day signified? It was Eli who finally broke the heavy silence as we pulled up to the house, fixing me with those serious green eyes that had seen far too much darkness for one so young. "I'm glad it's really over," he murmured. "That they got what they deserved, you know." I reached across the bench seat to squeeze his hand. "Me too, honey. It's all over now." The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of press, legal wrangling, and celebration from friends and family over our hard-won justice. But the moment that stood out most vividly was Eli's first art show at his new school. He'd been champing at the bit to show me his latest masterpieces, brimming with the pride and excitement of any kid his age. And finally, on opening night, I got to bask in the brilliant splashes of color and rebirth he'd committed to canvas. Each one was a searing reflection of the journey that led us here. Dark, muted tones juxtaposed against explosions of vibrant life. Harsh lines fracturing then melding back together in a mosaic of regeneration. Wordless stories of tragedy and redemption laid bare in acrylic strokes, more poignant than any writer could capture. That one there is how I felt for a long time, Eli explained, gripping my hand as we moved from canvas to canvas. His voice was contemplative, worlds away from the hollow echoes I'll never unhear from that closet. Scared, sad, like everything was cracking apart into pieces that I couldn't fix. He paused before a canvas emblazoned with a brilliant phoenix taking flight, wings unfurling in a blaze of crimson and gold. But this one is us now, rising up out of all the ugliness and hurt to start over, finding the color and beauty in life on the other side of the storm. Does that make sense? I pulled him close, blinking back tears of fierce pride and wonder at the resilient, insightful young man he was blossoming into. Another example of the tenacity with which new life can spring from unimaginable darkness. It makes perfect sense, I murmured into his hair. Because in that moment, bathed in the kaleidoscopic rebirth of his art, I saw the first rays of the new dawn we'd both fought so hard to reach. And as I held him, surrounded by this latest rebirth, one truth became startlingly clear. We would meet each fresh challenge rise over the horizon together, standing united before whatever storms lay ahead. Mother and grandson soldiering onwards into the light.